Marcus Bennett had convinced himself the trip back to Alabama would be easy. 5 years was a long time. Long enough, he thought, to turn memories into distant shadows and grief into something manageable. But as his pickup truck rolled to a stop at the end of a narrow gravel road, he realized he had been lying to himself. His hands remained locked around the steering wheel. The house was still there, only it wasn't the house he remembered. The old wooden fence that used to lean sideways had been repaired. Fresh paint covered the gate. Wild weeds that once swallowed the front yard had been replaced by neat rows of vegetables and flowers. Someone had been taking care of the place. Marcus frowned. That didn't make sense. No one was supposed to be here. Beside him, 11-year-old Tyler stirred awake from a nap. "Is this it?" he asked softly. Marcus nodded. "This is Grandpa's farm." Tyler pressed his face against the window. "It doesn't look abandoned." That was exactly the problem. A thin stream of smoke drifted from the chimney. Then the front door opened. A woman stepped onto the porch, carrying a basket of vegetables. She wasn't surprised to see the truck. She simply stood there, studying them as if she had been expecting visitors. Marcus felt his stomach tighten. Someone was living in his family's home, and he had no idea who she was. 5 years earlier, Marcus had been a completely different man. Back then, people depended on him. His wife, Claire, used to say he could fix anything. Broken fences, broken engines, broken days, then cancer took Claire. 8 months later, his mother passed away. His father followed not long after. The losses came so fast that Marcus stopped trying to keep up. The farm became a reminder of everything he couldn't save, so he left. He packed what little he owned, put Tyler in the truck, and spent years moving from city to city doing construction work, never staying long, never settling down, never looking back. At least, that's what he told himself. But Tyler was older now, old enough to ask difficult questions, questions Marcus couldn't avoid. Why don't we have a home? Why do we always leave? And one question that had haunted him for months. Dad, what did Grandma's kitchen smell like? Marcus remembered every detail. The fresh bread, the cinnamon, the coffee brewing before sunrise. But Tyler couldn't remember any of it. And that realization hurt more than Marcus expected, which was why they were here. A final tax notice had arrived weeks earlier. If Marcus didn't return and deal with the property, the farm would be auctioned off forever. He thought he was coming back to save a piece of land. Now, staring at the stranger standing on his porch, he wasn't so sure. Because something told him this woman wasn't going to leave quietly. And deep down, Marcus had the uncomfortable feeling that the biggest fight ahead wasn't about the farm at all. It was about everything he'd been running from for 5 years. As Marcus stepped out of the truck and started walking toward the porch, the woman looked directly into his eyes and spoke the last words he expected to hear. "I've been waiting for someone from this family to come back." Marcus climbed out of the truck, shutting the door a little harder than necessary. The woman remained on the porch, calm and motionless. She wasn't acting like a trespasser. She looked like someone standing on her own property. Tyler stayed close behind his father as they walked toward the house. The woman set down her basket and folded her arms. For a few seconds, nobody spoke. Then she broke the silence. "I've been waiting for someone from this family to come back." Marcus stopped halfway up the walkway. "What did you say?" Her expression softened slightly. "When I found this place, I figured eventually someone would return." Marcus glanced around the property again. The repaired fence, the flower beds, the freshly painted porch. Everywhere he looked, there were signs of work. Years of work. "My name is Marcus Bennett," he said firmly. "This farm belongs to my family." The woman nodded. "I know." That answer caught him off guard. "You know?" She disappeared inside for a moment and returned carrying an old metal box. Opening it carefully, she handed him a faded photograph. Marcus froze. It was a picture of his parents standing beside the barn nearly 20 years ago. A picture he hadn't seen since childhood. "Where did you get this?" "I found it in the attic," she replied. Marcus stared at the photograph, his father's smile, his mother's bright eyes. For a moment, he forgot why he was angry. Then reality returned. "Who are you?" "My name is Hannah Brooks," she paused. "I've been living here for almost 3 years. 3 years. Marcus felt his jaw tighten. 3 years in his family's home, 3 years on land that legally belonged to him. "You moved into an abandoned farmhouse?" Hannah shook her head. "Not exactly." She glanced toward the fields. I came here because I had nowhere else to go. For the first time, Marcus noticed the tiredness behind her eyes, the kind of exhaustion that doesn't come from missing sleep, the kind that comes from surviving too much. 3 years earlier, Hannah had worked as a physical therapist in Tennessee. She had a stable career, a small apartment, and plans for the future. Then a lawsuit at her clinic changed everything. She became a whistleblower after discovering patients were being billed for treatments they never received. Management blamed her for exposing the fraud. Within months, she lost her job. Her savings disappeared fighting legal battles. Friends slowly vanished. Even members of her own family stopped answering calls. Eventually, she packed everything she owned into an aging SUV and drove south without a destination. Then one afternoon, she found the abandoned farm. It was falling apart, she said quietly. The roof leaked, half the windows were broken, the garden was dead. She looked directly at Marcus, but I couldn't walk away. Marcus didn't know what to say. Part of him wanted to tell her she had no right to be here. Another part couldn't ignore what was standing in front of him. Without her, the farmhouse probably wouldn't exist anymore. Tyler suddenly spoke. Did you fix all of this yourself? A small smile appeared on Hannah's face. Most of it. Tyler's eyes widened. That's awesome. Marcus sighed heavily. The last thing he needed was for his son to like her. Because whether he wanted to admit it or not, this situation was about to become a lot more complicated. And neither of them knew that someone else had already been watching the farm from a distance. Someone who wanted the land for himself. Someone who was willing to do almost anything to get it. Later that evening, while Marcus unpacked inside the farmhouse, headlights appeared at the end of the driveway. A black truck rolled slowly toward the house, and the man behind the wheel smiled when he saw Marcus had finally come home. The black truck rolled to a stop beside the farmhouse, just as the sun disappeared behind the trees. Marcus was standing on the porch when the driver stepped out. The man looked to be in his late 50s, dressed in expensive boots and a pressed button-down shirt that seemed completely out of place on a dusty country road. Everything about him suggested money and confidence, the kind of confidence that came from getting what he wanted. He climbed the porch steps slowly and extended his hand. Marcus Bennett, I presume. Marcus ignored the hand. Who are you? The man smiled as if he'd expected that reaction. Richard Holloway. The name meant nothing to Marcus, but Hannah's expression changed immediately. Her shoulders stiffened. Marcus noticed. Richard noticed too. I see Hannah remembers me, he said. What do you want? Hannah asked coldly. Richard chuckled. Straight to business. I like that. He turned back toward Marcus. I own several development projects around the county. Marcus folded his arms. And your farm happens to sit on land that's become very valuable. The smile never left Richard's face. It would fit perfectly into a future expansion project. Marcus felt irritation building. This isn't for sale. Richard acted as though he hadn't heard him. I've been monitoring the tax situation for quite some time. That got Marcus's attention. What tax situation? Richard's smile widened. The unpaid property taxes. For a moment, nobody spoke. The evening suddenly felt colder. Marcus already knew the taxes were overdue. That was why he'd returned. But hearing a stranger discuss it so casually felt wrong. Very wrong. Richard continued. If those taxes remain unpaid, the county can move toward auction proceedings. I know that. Do you? The man tilted his head slightly. Because from what I've heard, you're running out of time. Marcus stepped forward. I'll handle my property. Richard's eyes narrowed for the first time. Not angry. Calculating. Perhaps. Then he glanced toward the farmhouse, toward the repaired porch, toward the garden, toward everything Hannah had rebuilt. A shame, really. What is? Hannah asked. Watching people become attached to things they're about to lose. The silence that followed felt heavy. Tyler appeared in the doorway behind Marcus. Richard noticed him immediately. For a brief second, something unreadable crossed the man's face. Then, the smile returned. Well, I won't keep you. He pulled a business card from his pocket and placed it on the porch railing. If you decide reality is more important than sentiment, call me. Marcus didn't touch the card. Richard tipped his head politely and walked back to his truck. A few seconds later, the vehicle disappeared down the gravel road. The moment it was gone, Marcus turned toward Hannah. How long has he been bothering you? About a year. Marcus frowned. A year? He kept asking questions. What kind of questions? Whether anyone owned the property. She paused. Whether anyone was coming back. The answer made Marcus uneasy, because Richard hadn't come here by accident. He'd been waiting, watching, planning. Tyler broke the silence. That guy gives me weird vibes. Marcus almost laughed. You're not wrong. But as darkness settled over the farm, Marcus couldn't stop thinking about Richard's words. Watching people become attached to things they're about to lose. The problem was that Richard assumed Marcus was afraid of losing the land. The truth was far more dangerous. For the first time in years, Marcus was starting to care about something again, and people who cared had something to fight for. Later that night, long after everyone else had gone to bed, Marcus walked through the old barn carrying a flashlight. He was checking the structure when the beam landed on something unusual. Fresh tire tracks. Not from his truck, not from Hannah's SUV. Tracks that led behind the barn and disappeared into the woods. Marcus slowly crouched beside them. Someone had been on the property recently. Very recently. And judging by the depth of the tracks, they hadn't come just to look around. As Marcus followed the tracks toward the tree line, his flashlight suddenly reflected off a metallic object hidden in the grass. When he picked it up, his stomach dropped. It was a pair of bolt cutters. And they weren't rusty. Someone had used them within the last few days. Marcus turned the bolt cutters over in his hands. The metal was clean. Too clean. There was no rust, no dirt packed into the hinges, no signs that it had been lying outside for weeks. Someone had used them recently, very recently. He scanned the dark woods beyond the barn with his flashlight. Nothing moved. The night was quiet except for crickets and the distant sound of water flowing through the creek at the edge of the property. Still, a strange feeling settled in his chest, the kind of feeling that told him he wasn't alone. After a few minutes, he headed back toward the house. There was no point wandering through the woods in complete darkness, but he slipped the bolt cutters into the barn before going inside. He wanted to think before saying anything. The next morning, Marcus woke before sunrise. Old habits, years of construction work had trained his body to rise with the first light. As he stepped onto the porch with a cup of coffee, he noticed Hannah already working in the garden. She was kneeling beside a row of vegetables, carefully inspecting leaves damaged by insects. For a moment, he simply watched. She moved through the rows with the confidence of someone who knew every inch of the land. It was strange. 3 days ago, he had never met her. Now she seemed woven into the farm itself. "You're staring," Hannah called without looking up. Marcus smirked. "You always this observant. Comes with surviving." That answer stuck with him. After a pause, he walked Kenjin into the garden. "I found something last night." That got her attention. He explained about the tire tracks, the bolt cutters, the location behind the barn. The more he spoke, the more serious Hannah became. Finally she stood. "I knew it." "Knew what?" "I've seen signs before." Marcus frowned. "What kind of signs?" "Footprints." She crossed her arms. "Once, I found part of the east fence cut. Why didn't you tell anyone?" She laughed softly. "Tell who? I was living alone in an abandoned farmhouse." Marcus couldn't argue with that. They spent the next hour inspecting the property together. Most of the farm looked normal, until they reached the eastern boundary. Marcus stopped. The fence had been repaired recently, but one section looked different. The wood was newer than the surrounding posts. Someone had replaced it. "When was this fixed?" he asked. "About 6 months ago." Hannah pointed toward the ground. "I found it cut clean through." Marcus crouched beside the post. The cut wasn't natural. It wasn't storm damage. It had been done deliberately. The same type of clean cut that bolt cutters could make. A cold realization settled over him. Someone had been entering the property long before he returned. And if that someone was Richard Holloway, it meant the developer's interest in the farm went much deeper than a simple business deal. Around noon, Marcus drove into town to collect supplies. The local hardware store was crowded. As he waited in line, an older man approached him. "You Bennett's boy?" Marcus nodded. The man's face brightened. "Thought so. You look just like your father." For the next 20 minutes, several townspeople stopped to welcome him back. Some remembered his parents. Others remembered him as a teenager. The conversations were friendly, until one elderly farmer pulled him aside. "Be careful around Holloway." Marcus immediately paid attention. "What do you mean?" The farmer lowered his voice. "That man doesn't like hearing the word no." Marcus waited. The farmer glanced around before continuing. 3 families sold land to him after pressure started showing up. "What kind of pressure?" The old man's expression darkened. enough that they eventually gave up fighting. Before Marcus could ask another question, the farmer walked away. The warning lingered in Marcus's mind all afternoon, because it confirmed what he already suspected. Richard Holloway wasn't just interested in buying the farm, he expected to own it. And people like that rarely accepted failure. That evening, Marcus returned home to find Tyler sitting on the porch steps. The boy looked unusually serious. "Dad? Yeah?" Tyler swallowed hard. "Someone was watching the house today." Marcus froze. "What?" Tyler pointed toward the woods. "I saw a man standing near the trees." A chill ran down Marcus's spine. "Did you recognize him?" Tyler slowly shook his head. "No." Then he looked directly at his father. "But when I waved at him," Tyler's voice dropped to a whisper. He didn't wave back. That night, just after midnight, a loud crash echoed from outside. Marcus grabbed a flashlight and ran to the front door. The moment he stepped onto the porch, his heart sank. Someone had destroyed the newly repaired front gate and nailed a single piece of paper to it. A message written in thick black marker. "You're running out of time." Marcus stared at the broken gate in disbelief. The wooden frame lay twisted on the ground. One of the posts had been ripped completely out of the earth. The message nailed to it fluttered in the night breeze. "You're running out of time." For a long moment, nobody spoke. Hannah stood beside him on the porch, her face pale under the moonlight. Tyler was behind them, wrapped in a blanket. "Dad, who did that?" Marcus didn't answer immediately, because he already had a pretty good idea. Richard Holloway. Maybe not personally, but someone working for him. The timing was too perfect to be a coincidence. Marcus pulled the paper free and folded it into his pocket. "We're going back inside." "What about the gate?" Hannah asked. "I'll deal with it in the morning." The truth was, he didn't trust the darkness anymore. Not tonight. The next day, Marcus started repairs before sunrise. Anger fueled every swing of the hammer, every nail, every board. By mid-morning, the gate stood upright again, stronger than before. As he worked, neighbors began stopping by. Word had spread quickly. Small towns had a way of doing that. Most simply shook their heads after hearing what happened. Others offered help. One elderly rancher even brought over spare fence posts. "Your dad helped me rebuild my barn after a tornado," the man said. "Figure it's my turn now." Marcus thanked him. For the first time since returning, he realized something important. His father hadn't just left him land. He'd left behind goodwill, relationships, a reputation built over decades, and people still remembered. That afternoon, Hannah returned from the farmer's market looking troubled. She placed a cash box on the kitchen table. The amount inside was far lower than usual. Marcus noticed immediately. "What happened?" She hesitated, then sighed. "Someone spreading rumors." Marcus already knew the answer before she spoke the name. "Richard." Hannah nodded. "He told people I'm illegally occupying the farm." She sat down heavily. "And that you're planning to sell the property after collecting donations from the community." Marcus clenched his jaw. "None of that's true." "I know, but some people don't." Silence filled the kitchen. Outside the window, Tyler was watering the garden. The boy looked happier here than he'd looked in years. That made the situation feel even more personal. Richard wasn't just attacking the property anymore. He was attacking the people trying to save it. That evening, Marcus drove into town. Not to confront Richard. At least, that wasn't the plan. He simply wanted answers, but fate had other ideas. As he walked out of the feed store carrying supplies, he spotted Richard standing outside a local diner. The developer smiled the moment he saw him, almost as if he'd been expecting this meeting. "Marcus," Richard adjusted his jacket. "How's the farm?" Marcus stopped a few feet away. "Cut the games." The smile remained. "I don't know what you mean." "The gate." Richard laughed softly. "You think I did that? I think somebody wants me gone." Richard stepped closer. "You know what's funny?" Marcus said nothing. "When I first heard you came back, I expected a fight." The older man looked toward the distant countryside. "But now," his eyes returned to Marcus. "I think you'll leave on your own." Marcus felt anger rising. "What makes you so sure?" Richard's expression changed. For the first time, the friendly mask slipped, and underneath it was something colder, something harder. Because people don't run from a place for 5 years unless they're running from themselves. The words hit harder than Marcus expected. Richard noticed, and smiled again. "There it is." "What?" "The truth." Marcus stared at him. Richard lowered his voice. This farm isn't your problem. The smile vanished completely. Your past is. Then he turned and walked away, leaving Marcus standing alone in the parking lot. For the rest of the drive home, those words echoed in his head. Because as much as he hated admitting it, part of Richard was right. Marcus hadn't left because of the farm. He'd left because staying hurt too much. And now that he was back, all those old wounds were waiting for him. But what Marcus didn't know was that Richard wasn't relying on rumors anymore. He was already preparing something much worse. Something that could force them off the property forever. The following morning, a county official arrived at the farmhouse carrying a thick envelope. When Marcus opened it, his face went pale. Because according to the paperwork, someone had filed a legal challenge questioning whether he was the rightful heir to the farm. And the name at the bottom of the filing was one he recognized immediately. Richard Holloway. Marcus read the legal notice 3 times, then a 4th. The words never changed. Someone was officially challenging his claim to the farm. For several seconds, he simply stood in the kitchen staring at the paperwork. Hannah watched from across the table. What does it mean? Marcus slowly lowered the pages. It means Richard isn't trying to buy the farm anymore. He looked toward the window. He's trying to take it. The county official shifted uncomfortably. You have 14 days to respond. 14 days? The man nodded. If you don't provide supporting documentation, the challenge moves forward. The front door closed behind him. Silence filled the room. Tyler looked between Marcus and Hannah. Are we losing the farm? Marcus immediately shook his head. No. But even he wasn't fully convinced. The problem wasn't ownership. His father had left everything to him. The problem was paperwork. Years of moving from place to place had left important documents scattered across storage units, old addresses, and forgotten boxes. Richard knew that, and he was counting on it. That afternoon, Marcus drove to the county courthouse. The building looked exactly as he remembered. Old brick walls, white columns, a clock tower that always seemed 5 minutes slow. Inside, he requested copies of every record connected to the property. An elderly clerk spent nearly an hour digging through archives. Eventually, she returned carrying several folders. As Marcus reviewed them, something caught his attention. A transfer request, filed almost 8 months earlier. His eyes narrowed. The request wasn't approved, but it had been submitted, and the applicant was Richard Holloway. Marcus felt a chill run through him. Richard had been working on this long before he came back, long before the threats, long before the rumors. This wasn't a sudden business opportunity. It was a plan, a very long plan. Can I get copies of these? Marcus asked. The clerk nodded. Everything, except sealed records. Marcus thanked her and headed toward the parking lot. But before reaching his truck, he heard a familiar voice. Finding what you're looking for? Marcus turned. Richard stood beside a black SUV, perfectly dressed, perfectly calm, as if this meeting had been scheduled. You followed me? Richard smiled. This is a small town. Marcus stepped closer. You've been trying to get this property for years. Of course I have. The honesty surprised him. No denial? Why would I deny it? Richard shrugged. Good land is good land. Marcus held up the courthouse documents. You filed ownership requests before I even came back. Richard's expression remained relaxed. Business requires preparation. No, this requires obsession. For the first time, Richard's smile faded. A brief crack in the mask. Then it returned. You know what your problem is, Marcus? Marcus said nothing. You think this story is about land. Richard leaned against his vehicle. It's not. What is it about? The older man looked directly into his eyes. Pride. Marcus frowned. Richard continued. You disappeared for 5 years. His voice stayed calm. You abandoned this place. Marcus felt anger rising. I buried my wife. I know. I buried my parents. I know that too. Richard nodded slowly. But grief doesn't stop consequences. The words hit like a punch. Because Marcus had spent years telling himself he had no choice. Now someone was forcing him to confront decisions he didn't want to examine. Richard opened the SUV door. Whether you like me or not doesn't matter. He paused. The question is whether you can save this farm before reality catches up. Then he got into the vehicle and drove away. Marcus stood frozen in the parking lot. For the first time, doubt crept in. Not about Richard, about himself. Had he waited too long? Had he already lost too much? When he returned home that evening, Hannah noticed immediately that something was wrong. But before he could explain, Tyler came running from the barn. "Dad!" Marcus looked up. "What is it?" The boy was out of breath, his face pale. "There's someone inside the barn." Every muscle in Marcus's body tightened. "What?" Tyler pointed toward the far side of the property. "I saw a flashlight." Marcus dropped the folders and started running, because whoever was in that barn wasn't there by accident, and deep down, he already knew what they were looking for. As Marcus reached the barn and threw open the doors, he expected to find an intruder. Instead, he found something even more shocking. An old wooden chest hidden beneath loose floorboards. A chest that had clearly been buried there decades ago. And inside was a document that could change everything. Marcus reached the barn doors and pulled them open so hard they slammed against the walls. His heart was racing. For a moment, he expected someone to come running out from the shadows. Nobody did. The barn was empty. At least, it appeared to be. The flashlight Tyler had seen was gone. No footsteps, no voices, nothing. Hannah arrived seconds later, breathing hard from the run across the yard. "What happened?" Marcus scanned the interior carefully. "I don't know." Tyler stood near the entrance. "I saw someone, Dad. I swear." Marcus believed him. The boy wasn't the type to invent stories. Then something caught his eye. A loose floorboard near the back workbench. It wasn't lying flat. Someone had disturbed it recently. Marcus walked over and knelt down. The wood looked older than the surrounding boards. Carefully, he pried it upward. Beneath it was a small, hollow space, and inside sat an old wooden chest coated in dust. For several seconds, nobody moved. "Was that always there?" Hannah asked. Marcus slowly shook his head. "I've never seen it before." The chest wasn't locked, just old, very old. He lifted the lid. Inside were dozens of yellowed papers, photographs, and a sealed envelope. The envelope immediately caught his attention. Written across the front in faded ink were 4 simple words. "For my family." Marcus stared at the handwriting. His father's. His hands suddenly felt unsteady. He carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a letter. The paper crackled as he unfolded it. The first sentence made his throat tighten. "If you're reading this, then life probably didn't go the way any of us expected." The barn became completely silent. Even Tyler stopped moving. Marcus continued reading. The letter explained how his grandfather had purchased the original land nearly 70 years earlier. But there was more. Far more. Attached to the letter were legal surveys, maps, and property records. Records proving that several acres bordering the Eastern Creek had never been included in county development plans. Land that developers had been trying to acquire for years. Land worth significantly more than anyone realized. Hannah looked up. "Marcus, I know." Now Richard's obsession made sense. The farm wasn't valuable because of the house. It was valuable because of what sat beneath it and around it. The additional land could completely change future development projects. Richard hadn't been chasing a farmhouse. He'd been chasing opportunity, and he had almost gotten it. Tyler pointed toward another document. "What's that?" Marcus picked it up. His eyes widened. It was a notarized affidavit signed by his grandfather decades earlier. A document confirming inheritance rights through the Bennett family line. Exactly the kind of evidence Richard claimed didn't exist. The kind of evidence that could destroy the ownership challenge. For the first time in weeks, Marcus felt hope. Real hope. Then Hannah noticed something else. A photograph hidden beneath the papers. She pulled it free. The image showed Marcus's father standing beside another man, both smiling, both shaking hands. Marcus frowned. He recognized his father immediately. The second man took a moment longer. Then realization hit him. His stomach dropped. Because the man standing beside his father was Richard Holloway, only much younger, 25 years younger. The entire barn seemed to go still. "What is that?" Tyler asked. Marcus couldn't answer. He kept staring at the photograph. His father and Richard weren't strangers. They had known each other, maybe even trusted each other, which meant Richard's interest in the farm wasn't just business, it was personal, very personal. That night, Marcus barely slept. Questions circled endlessly through his mind. What had happened between his father and Richard? Why had nobody ever mentioned him? And why was Richard willing to spend years trying to get control of this property? The next morning, those questions became even more urgent, because a black SUV was parked outside the farm gate, waiting, and standing beside it was Richard Holloway himself. This time, he wasn't smiling. As Marcus walked toward the gate, carrying the old photograph in his hand, Richard's face suddenly lost all color. For the first time since returning to Alabama, Marcus saw genuine fear in the developer's eyes. And in that moment, he knew the photograph was hiding a secret Richard never wanted anyone to uncover. Marcus stopped a few feet from the gate. The morning air was cool, but he barely noticed. His attention was fixed on Richard Holloway, more specifically, on the expression spreading across the developer's face. Fear. Not irritation, not frustration, fear. Marcus held up the old photograph. The reaction was immediate. Richard's eyes locked onto it. For the first time since Marcus had returned to the farm, the man seemed completely unprepared. "Where did you get that?" Richard asked quietly. Marcus didn't answer. Instead, he studied him. Every previous conversation had ended the same way. Richard calm, Richard confident, Richard in control. Not today. "Looks like you knew my father better than you admitted." The older man remained silent. "Funny thing," Marcus continued. "You spent weeks acting like this farm was just another business deal." Richard's jaw tightened. "What do you want?" "The truth." For several seconds, neither man spoke. Finally, Richard sighed, a tired sound, almost defeated. "You should have asked your father years ago." Marcus folded his arms. "Ask him what?" Richard glanced toward the farmhouse, toward the barn, toward the land stretching beyond the trees. Then he spoke. 30 years ago, your father and I were partners." Marcus froze. Behind him, Hannah stepped closer. Neither of them had expected that answer. "We bought land together," Richard continued. "We planned developments together." Marcus looked down at the photograph. Suddenly it made sense. The handshake, the smiles, the familiarity. "What happened?" Richard laughed bitterly. "The same thing that always happens." His eyes darkened. Money. According to Richard, a major commercial project had nearly made both men wealthy. But during the final negotiations, Marcus's father backed out. He refused to sell several family-owned acres connected to the project. The decision caused investors to walk away. The development collapsed, and Richard lost everything he'd invested. For years, he blamed Marcus's father, blamed the farm, blamed the family. "I rebuilt my career," Richard said, "but I never forgot." Marcus felt anger rising. "So this entire thing is revenge?" At first, Richard nodded. "Maybe." The honesty was unsettling. "But then I discovered something." Marcus waited. "The Eastern Creek property." His voice lowered. "The same land in those documents." Richard pointed toward the farm. "Developers have wanted access to it for years. Now the pieces finally fit together. The inheritance challenge, the pressure campaign, the rumors, everything." Richard wasn't trying to preserve a grudge. He was trying to secure the most valuable section of land in the county, and Marcus's family stood in the way. "What happens if I refuse to sell?" Richard looked at him for a long moment. Then something surprising happened. He smiled. Not the fake smile, not the business smile, a genuine one. Because suddenly, he seemed relieved. As strange as this sounds, he shook his head. "I think your father would have liked that answer." Marcus frowned. "What?" Richard stared across the property. "Your dad was stubborn." A small laugh escaped him. "Most frustrating man I ever met." For the first time, there was no hostility in his voice. Only memory, only regret. And Marcus realized something important. Richard wasn't the villain he'd imagined. Not entirely. He had made terrible choices. But beneath the greed and pressure was an old wound that had never healed. Just like Marcus, just like Hannah. Everyone on this farm seemed to be carrying ghosts. The difference was whether they kept running from them or finally faced them. Richard looked at the photograph one last time. Then he reached into his jacket and pulled out a folder. He handed it to Marcus. "What's this?" "Withdrawal papers." Marcus blinked. "What?" "The ownership challenge." Richard nodded. "It's over." Hannah stared in disbelief. "You're walking away?" Richard looked toward the farmhouse, toward the home he'd spent years trying to obtain. Then he gave a slow nod. Some battles stop being worth winning. Without another word, he turned and walked back toward his SUV. Marcus watched him go. Part of him expected another trick, another surprise, but none came. The vehicle disappeared down the road and never looked back. For the first time since returning, the farm felt peaceful, safe, like it could finally breathe again. But neither Marcus nor Hannah knew that one final challenge still remained, because saving the farm from Richard was only half the battle. Now they had to save it from the debt that was still hanging over them. And the deadline was closer than ever. 3 days later, Marcus received a phone call from the county office. After listening for less than 30 seconds, the color drained from his face. The tax deadline had been moved up, and unless they found the remaining money within 1 week, the farm could still be auctioned away forever. The kitchen fell silent after Marcus ended the phone call. Hannah immediately knew something was wrong. He looked as though someone had punched him in the stomach. What happened? Marcus slowly lowered the phone. The county moved up the deadline. The words landed like a weight in the room. Tyler looked up from the table. How much time do we have? Marcus swallowed. 1 week. Nobody spoke. 7 days. After everything they had survived, after fighting Richard, after finding the hidden documents, after finally believing they had a chance, now the clock was running faster than ever. That evening, Marcus spread every financial record across the kitchen table. Bills, receipts, invoices, savings, every dollar they had managed to collect over the past month. Result wasn't good. Not terrible, but not enough. They were still thousands of dollars short. Hannah stared at the numbers. There has to be another way. Marcus rubbed his forehead. I've checked everything. Outside, rain tapped softly against the windows. The farmhouse felt smaller than usual, the pressure heavier. Then Tyler quietly spoke. What about the barn? Marcus looked up. The barn? Tyler nodded. People keep asking about your furniture. Marcus frowned. The boy wasn't wrong. Over the past few weeks, several neighbors had admired Marcus's woodworking projects. Custom tables, shelves, handcrafted benches, pieces he built during evenings and weekends. Hannah suddenly sat upright. Wait, Marcus looked at her. What? The Harvest Festival. His eyes widened. Every autumn, the county hosted its largest community event. Hundreds of visitors attended. Local vendors sold food, crafts, artwork, and handmade goods. People came from neighboring counties, sometimes farther. You think we could sell enough? Hannah's voice grew stronger. I think we have to try. For the next 6 days, the farmhouse transformed into a workshop. Marcus worked from sunrise until midnight, cutting wood, sanding edges, building furniture, repairing old pieces, creating everything he could finish before the festival. Meanwhile, Hannah threw herself into production. Preserves, homemade bread, candles, garden products, anything people might buy. Even Tyler joined in. He painted signs, helped package products, and proudly harvested vegetables from the garden he had helped grow. The entire property buzzed with energy. For the first time, they weren't just fighting against something. They were building towards something. By festival morning, exhaustion covered all 3 of them. But so did hope. The town square was already crowded when they arrived. Rows of vendors stretched across several blocks. Music filled the air. Children ran between booths. The atmosphere felt alive. Marcus arranged furniture while Hannah prepared her display. Then they waited. The first customer arrived within minutes. Then another. Then another. By noon, a crowd had formed around Marcus's handcrafted pieces. People admired the craftsmanship, asked questions, placed orders. Several items sold immediately. Hannah's products disappeared even faster. By mid-afternoon, nearly half her inventory was gone. Tyler could barely contain his excitement. Dad! He ran over carrying a stack of receipts. We're actually doing it! For the first time in weeks, Marcus smiled. A real smile. The kind that reached his eyes. As sunset approached, they counted the money together. The total was far beyond what they'd expected. Enough to close most of the remaining gap. Maybe all of it. Hope surged through the group. Then a black luxury SUV pulled into the festival parking area. Marcus immediately recognized it. Richard Holloway. Hannah tensed beside him. Tyler stopped smiling. But something felt different. Richard wasn't wearing his usual confident expression. Instead, he carried a large envelope, and he was walking directly toward them. When Richard reached the booth, he placed the envelope on the table and looked at Marcus. Then he said 5 words nobody expected to hear. Your father asked me to. And inside the envelope was something that could save the farm forever. Marcus stared at Richard. The noise of the festival seemed to fade into the background. Your father asked me to. Those words didn't make sense. Not at first. Richard pushed the envelope across the table. Marcus hesitated before opening it. Inside was a thick stack of papers. At the top was a handwritten letter. The handwriting was unmistakable. His father's. Marcus felt his chest tighten. Slowly, he unfolded the letter. The paper had yellowed with age. It had clearly been written years ago. The first line made his throat close. "Richard, if you're reading this, then something has happened to me before we settled things the right way." Marcus continued reading. The letter revealed a side of the story he had never known. Years earlier, after their business partnership collapsed, Marcus's father had reached out to Richard, not to argue, not to fight, to apologize. He admitted that he had handled things poorly, that he should have explained his decision instead of walking away. The reason he'd protected the family land wasn't greed, it wasn't stubbornness. At the time, Marcus's mother had already been diagnosed with a serious illness. Selling the land would have meant relocating, leaving behind the home she loved during the most difficult period of her life. So he chose family over money, and in doing so, he lost a friend. Marcus paused, his eyes burned. The letter continued. "I don't know if you'll ever forgive me, but if my son comes back one day, and if this farm is ever in danger, help him if you can. He'll be carrying enough weight already." The crowd around them disappeared from Marcus's awareness. For years he had believed his father left behind unfinished problems. Instead, he'd left behind unfinished forgiveness. Marcus looked up. Richard's eyes were fixed on the ground. "He gave me that letter 20 years ago," Richard said quietly. "Why didn't you tell me?" Richard laughed bitterly. "Because I was angry." He looked toward the distant fields beyond the town. "Then I stayed angry so long that I forgot why." Silence settled between them. Not uncomfortable, just honest. Finally, Richard pointed to the rest of the documents. "Keep reading." Marcus looked down. Behind the letter was a certified bank document. Then another, and another. His eyes widened. "What is this?" Richard exhaled slowly. "Your father invested money into a trust before he died." Marcus froze. "A trust? He wanted it protected." Richard nodded. "He asked me to manage it if anything happened to him." Hannah covered her mouth. Tyler looked completely confused. Marcus flipped through the pages. The account had grown for years, carefully invested, carefully protected. The amount was more than enough to eliminate the tax debt, more than enough to secure the future of the farm. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then Tyler broke the silence. "So, we get to stay?" Marcus looked at his son. The farmhouse, the garden, the barn, the creek, the life they had built. Everything flashed through his mind. Then he smiled. "Yeah, buddy." His voice cracked. "We get to stay." Tyler threw his arms around him. Hannah wiped tears from her eyes. And for the first time since returning home, Marcus felt something he hadn't felt in years. Peace. The debt was paid 4 days before the deadline. The ownership challenge disappeared. The farm officially remained in the Bennett family. Winter arrived slowly. Then all at once, the greenhouse was rebuilt stronger than before. Marcus expanded his woodworking business and soon had orders scheduled months in advance. Hannah's farm products became popular throughout the county. Local restaurants began buying directly from her, and Tyler finally stopped asking when they would move again, because for the first time in his life, he had a permanent home. One cold evening in December, Marcus stood on the porch, watching snow dust the fields. The property looked peaceful beneath the fading sunlight. Hannah stepped outside, carrying 2 cups of coffee. She handed one to him. Neither spoke for a while. They didn't need to. Some silence felt empty. Others felt complete. This one felt complete. Marcus looked across the land his family had protected for generations, the place he had once run from, the place he thought was filled only with pain. Instead, it had given him a second chance, a future, a family, and the realization that home isn't just where you come from, it's where you decide to stay. As the porch light glowed behind them, and laughter drifted from inside the house, Marcus finally understood something his father had known all along. Some things are worth fighting for, not because they're perfect, but because they're yours. The end. Final message. Sometimes the hardest journey isn't leaving a place behind. It's finding the courage to return and discover that healing has been waiting there all along.